Good morning from Washington. I'm Brian McGuire, and welcome to this Euractiv conference on the future of trade and industrial products, the consequences of the EU-US trade deal. Today's program is supported by VDMA. Our Slido today, you may have seen on the screen a few moments ago, is a trade deal. There you go. Use the QR code there. Use the Slido trade deal to send us questions. We're going to be taking questions throughout the program and not just at the end, so you can get started at any time. I would ask if you can just tell us who you are, where you're from, and if you have a specific question for one of our speakers today, please note that in the question as well. We'll be happy to address those questions all the way through the program today, so please send them as soon as possible. Our discussion today, as all of you know, is the EU-US trade deal and the complexity of that. Why what should be bringing certainty just hasn't done that, and the navigation that's required for Europe's manufacturing sector, its industrial sector, with different layers of tariffs, subsidies, and state support, all called into question in different formats. We're also looking at how European exporters are even being forced to stop exporting because of this complexity, because of the cost and the risks that poses to the European economy, but also to the livelihoods of these companies as well. And we're going to ask, is Europe's current trade strategy fit for purpose? We're operating in a global environment. It's not just about EU-US relations. China's in the mix here, and Mercosur, all these different dynamics as well. We're going to touch on those as best we can today. We have an excellent panel lined up. We have Matthias Jorgensen. He's the head of unit to the USA and Canada, DG Trade, European Commission. Thank you for joining us. Matthias, who's having some technical issues. We'll come back in just a moment. Kathleen Van Bremt, a member of the European Parliament, vice chair of the INTA committee. Good to see you, Kathleen. And we have Yoga Riklis. He's associate director and head of Europe's political economy program at the EPC. We have Thibault Lorte. He's the senior director of public affairs at AmCham EU. And we have Verena Thies, vice president of the VDMA. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for taking the time with this as well. Kathleen, can we start with you for your 60 seconds and your key message for today?
Oh, I didn't know I was meant to start, but with pleasure. I want to 60 seconds is short, but we are trained to do that in the European Parliament. I just want to give you my take on the trade deal. Well, it's not a trade deal. The deal or the agreement that was struck between the European Commission and the United States government, the Trump administration on trade, to be crystal clear, and it's not just my personal opinion, it's the opinion of my political group, which is the S&D, it's the second largest group in the European Parliament. So key to any agreement, to any vote in the European Parliament, we said from the start we're not going to rubber stamp this deal. This is not a good deal. It's actually a bad deal. It is neither fair nor it is balanced. The industry, and I do understand, and also the Commission uses the argument that it is a predictable deal, and that it gives some certainty to our industry and to our consumers. But I don't think it is the case, and that's why we will alter the agreement, especially the part that is in the European Parliament related to the tariffs. And we will alter it in the sense that we will try to make it more stable. So a standstill clause is essential. A sunset clause to say it's only temporary, and also to include some safeguards. What will be the effect of this agreement on our industry and our economy? And my last point is that, as you all know, this deal is also linked to the fact that we are forced to invest and to buy in the United States. And one of the basic lines that we've learned during the course of both the war in Ukraine and our dependency on gas and oil, but also the way Trump is dealing with Europe and our security and safety policy, and our reliance on the security policy of the US makes it so important that we have a real economic security strategy and get less dependent on the rest of the world when it comes to our basic needs, such as safety, supply chain, things like that.
Georg Rieglis, over to you, 60 seconds.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to participate in this debate. And I'm afraid I can't really come in and contradict Kathleen here. I think this deal also is a bit of a ignominy, to put it that way. I mean, it's far from welcome, and I read this agreement as quite a significant policy mistake of quite historic proportions. I think lacking from both resulting from a lack both of strategic acumen in the Commission and also obviously fragmented member states. And the result of this now is that the EU, and I think we see it every week now, is geopolitically and geoeconomically cornered, and we're lacking agency. You see it on the CRM file. You see it when we negotiate or the positions we are on chips, an Xperia story, and how that has unfolded. And I think any resolution now of these dependencies comes as sort of a lucky, volatile byproduct of US-Chinese deals, not because of our own capacity. And I think what's really important to see here is that there was an alternative. I think Canada, India, Brazil, South Korea, Japan, and I guess China too, they were expecting something else from something different from Europe, a Europe that would have been capable to stand up to US coercion. We entered into this deal because of Ireland and big tech, and Germany and automotive industry. But if you look at the world today, take the example of South Korea, they are being forced to put 50% of their national reserves on a US escrow account. That is the state of coercion today. And I think what happened over the summer was that the EU did not seize its geopolitical moment, and the EU did not seize its geopolitical moment. We're also then facing a deal that does not deliver for the EU economically, and I think this the machinery sector is clearly an example of that. We are facing, as European industries, in effect, export bans to the US. So I think the question here is not if this deal will fail or whether it has to be rewritten. It has to be rewritten, or it will fail. Will it fail on the side of the US? I think we can expect further bullying from Trump now. We've seen it in IMO when it comes to emission standards. We'll see it on environmental rules. We'll see it on digital rules. Or will it fail because the EU can't support this agreement? Let's see. But certainly this is not the kind of position we should put ourselves in.
Thank you so much. Thibault Lotte.
Thanks, Brian. So AmCham represents American companies that are invested in Europe. So for us, this relationship is critical. I mean, it's an 8.7 trillion euro relationship. And so you can imagine that for us, with supply chains that are so integrated, I mean, we're very, very worried about, this basically relationship going south. And so let me maybe start by making one thing very clear from our perspective. I mean, we do not support gross-based tariffs. We've been saying that for a very long time. They increase costs for consumers, they disrupt supply chains. And so we're in a situation today where we didn't really want to be. That being said, I mean, we've decided to support the EU-US Framework Agreement because we see it at the moment as the best way forward. Not so much only to bring back predictability, because of course it's all very relative, but also because the alternative from an economic standpoint was pretty dire in terms of situation. We were looking at basically retaliation from the EU side, escalation potentially into services. And so what that was putting on the table and at stake was ultimately consumers, businesses on both sides of the Atlantic that would have been impacted. And so moving forward, what will be critical now is to focus on the implementation of the deal, because of course we are very focused on the tariff rates, and we can talk about some of that and what that means for industries indeed, but there's more in the framework that actually opens an opportunity for both sides to focus on a more constructive, positive agenda as they look at more areas where there is room for cooperation in a world that increasingly has become very complex. And so to us, the implementation will be key, including the proposals that are currently being looked at. This was just referenced in the European Parliament and by the member states. So we can dive into some of that after.
Thank you, Thibault. Verena.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm representing the VDMA in today's discussion, which is the Machine Equipment Association. So my aim for today is to share some insights on the, let's say, daily challenges we are facing. And as you might know, the machinery sector is confronted not only with the base tariff, but also with the so-called Section 232, the steel and aluminium derivatives. And therefore, we are not only having the burdens of the costs on our shoulders, but also the bureaucracy which comes along with the steel and aluminium tariffs.
Matthias, are we able to hear you? Can you hear us? Oh, I can't hear you yet. We're not getting sound. Let's see. We'll come back to you in just a moment. Let's see if we can resolve that. Thank you. Verena, I just want to ask, we want to set the scope in practical terms for discussion today. You know, for machine manufacturers, and you work in producing textile machinery, from what I understand as well. What does this mean? What does the EU deal, US deal, mean for machine manufacturers when they're exporting to the United States at the moment, in practical terms?
So the bureaucratic burden includes that we have to document the content of the steel and aluminium, and as well their origin. And if you imagine, for example, our machines have sizes of 12 to 16 meters with several thousands parts, and we are simply not able to fulfill these requirements. And the sorrow is if you are not able to hand in these answers, that you will have to pay a 200% tariff. And therefore, some of our member companies already stopped their exports because their fear is so high to make bureaucratic mistakes that they don't want to export anymore. And it is already shown in the numbers. So when we compare the German machinery exports to the US, compared to last year, it's already down by 18.5%.
The European Parliament, does it understand the nitty-gritty of this? Does it understand that it's not just the tariffs, that as Verena describes, we have lots of layers of bureaucracy here which are stifling the capacity to export and stripping out profitability as well. Where is the Parliament focused?
Well, the Parliament focus is to rebalance, both at a political as at economic level, this so-called agreement. Like Georg said, and I completely agree, it's at the political level, the European Union as a whole has not taken up the opportunity to show itself as a very economic partner that on the one hand defends international law, in this sense, the international law on trade. I'm not saying that we shouldn't reform or completely reinvent the WTO. We should be ready to do that. But what we do need in the world is a rules-based trading system. We didn't do that because everybody knows that this agreement is not WTO compliant. So it is in contradiction or in breach of that. We should have been the defenders of that, and we should have taken that on board with our allies. Think about Japan, Canada, Australia. We should have put a big alliance and say no to the United States. We didn't do that. We crawled because we were very much afraid. And of course, never ever forget, because we are so tied up with the United States when it comes to defense. And of course, we have a war to win in Ukraine. We all know that is part of the deal, but I don't think this is the solution. At the economical level, and of course they're intertwined. Everything today is geopolitically, economically. Trade is now a geopolitical issue, and the other way around. So, at the economic level, I think Verena explained it really very well. I don't know all the nitty-gritty, as you asked me, but I don't have to know that. I understand that this is a deal that cannot be, you cannot comply with that deal, and the effect will be that we stop exporting some certain products, and I think the machine industry is the best example of that. Having said that, we have, but maybe Verena can, or Thibaut could answer that question much better, but my information says that what we produce in Europe, only another country can produce in the same technicalities, and that is China. So the US needs these machines. If they want to produce, not all of them, but if they want to produce themselves, you need a whole new ecosystem in the United States, and you need at least 10 years to get there. So what will be the result of all of this? You just saw that Trump withdrew some of his tariffs, mainly on food, because there you have direct impact. This is indirect. This will take some time, but the impact will be exactly the same, that the prices will go up dramatically. Because there will not be machineries in the United States to produce what you need to produce. So I think the economic impact will be, it's bad for Europe, but it will be equally bad for the United States. And that makes it all
Thibaut is right in that the tariffs on food have hurt consumers. Consumers are paying more attention now as well. The dynamics for manufacturers at this level for industrial machinery is slightly different, but they have a different lobbying capacity as well, because they tend to have the ear of the Department of Commerce, for example. They have large scale representations in DC. So how do you see this messaging getting through? It's not going to come through for some time on Main Street. Is industry itself making the right representations in Washington to make it understood that this is going to cost America, not just in terms of productivity and competitiveness, but also in the people's pockets eventually too?
No, and you're exactly right, Brian. I think U.S. industry groups, we're based in Brussels, but our kind of sister organizations in the U.S. have made it extremely clear that they don't support that policy, right? I think the question just becomes, and I think it's a bit probably the issue we have right now with the deal. We're comparing it to our kind of ideal scenario or some sort of aspiration of what this relationship could or should be. We need to be comparing the deal with basically the cards that were put on the table. And so I think the responsibility we all have to some extent is finding a way to make this relationship move forward with the priorities that we have on both sides of the Atlantic. And so if you take specifically the issue of steel derivatives that Verena alluded to, that's something that US industry is concerned about. You had, I think it's about 20 different business groups in the US that kind of raised that concern to the administration just a few months ago. So I think on this, we're extremely aligned. The question will become, for those of us who want to make this relationship move forward from an economic standpoint, is what's the best way to do that? And our, assessment of the situation is that the deal that we have now on the table provides us with the opportunity to build on it. And so, as we're looking, for example, at sectors that were exempted, it's the case for generics, for example. We've seen it for some critical minerals, etc. What is the opportunity to, at some point, extend that list? And so the ability to do that to us is in the cooperation and the dialogue we can bring between the two sides. And to be able to do this, basically the number one step is to make sure we implement the deal as it's been put forward.
Is that if Europe pushes back against this deal, they could end up with nothing on the table for a time, because the coercion that could be applied has the potential to be really substantial and to cause a lot of pain quickly. Georg.
Yes, well,
audio.
I think. Yeah, the audio was a little bit delayed, so I didn't hear it was to me. But no, clearly, Brian, I think there's three sort of lessons to be learned from this. One is political, a second is policy, and the third is in terms of about negotiations and what we do with this deal. First, the political lesson here, and I personally find there's a lot of responsibility with Commission President von der Leyen here. Because it's true that when the Commission was negotiating this, at some point they tried to push for a stronger stance with the US and getting the member states along to be able to retaliate. And the reality is that member states, when the Commission looked back behind their back, there were no member states really supporting them. And I think this is the first failure we have encountered here, and that is comes down to the Commission leadership, a lack of building EU27 unity and common positions in understanding and in standing up to the kind of changed economic environment, geopolitical environment we're in. If you think back to Brexit, admittedly, it was much less systemic than this, but it was also existential. It was the exact opposite that was done. One anchored high-level principles at the European Council level. One had put in place a dedicated negotiating team working across institutions, where we're touring member states, one make sure one had a united EU27 position. This was not constructed over months in the Commission. On the contrary, what happened was that President von der Leyen pulled the deal and the negotiation close to her and tried to play the chessboard on her own, and that failed. And I think how that spectacularly failed was going into the final negotiations in Scotland, where I get the impression one only had one idea in mind, which was one needs a deal, one needs a deal. And then obviously what's going to happen then is that the Trump boys, they stuff it down your throat. And that is what happened. And this is the sad story of EU-US relations right now. Policy lessons, I think Kathleen touched upon it. One needs to start redressing all this now and thinking through what Europe needs to do it for itself in terms of economic security. One has a framework which is about promote, protect, partner, and all that, but one really needs to get serious at looking at Europe's dependencies and working at them systematically so that one is less dependent on others and has agency for oneself. And then in terms of negotiations, and I think that's mainly your question, Brian, there's no point and there's no reason that one should lie down and accept this deal as it stands. I think the more one lies down, the more one gets steamrolled over in this world with Trump. And you asked the question, does the European Parliament know the nitty-gritty of this? I'm not so worried about that. I see the European Parliament, in my view, that has put a very sensible position on the table, what's being called Bernd Lange's 5 S's, which is about building into this deal, making the best out of it, not repudiating it outright, but making it something that is workable also for the EU. And that is about these 5 S's. It's about the sunset clause, it is about safeguard mechanism, and it's addressing some of the rights or the wrongs that needs to be put right, such as what we're seeing and what the machinery industry is facing now on their products. In short, what the US is saying is, I'm simplifying a bit, but they're saying that when we're exporting motorcycles to the US and when we're exporting machinery, this is not motorcycles and this is not machinery, this is steel, hence you get the higher tariff, 50%. And as a way of shutting European industries out of their markets. And this is obviously very much a breach of the spirit of the deal, of even looking at how bad it is. So I hear what AmCham is saying. One needs predictability and stability. Fair enough, but that can be done with a sunset clause. A sunset clause that says, okay, one needs to correct some of this, and this temporary arrangement that one has now lapses in a certain period of time, and then one goes back to the status quo ante or to something else.
Okay, let me stop you there. I want to, Thibaut wants to respond. I want to ask Kathleen about some of the negotiations. Then I want to go to Verena to talk about some of the details on the steel and aluminium. So Thibaut.
Yeah, I think some of the issues I would separate. Honestly, I think there is indeed an issue around steel derivatives, and there is a way to address it through engagement with the US government. And that's, I think, what's happening currently with the Commission, and we'll see where that leads. I think that's one element. There is what's being reviewed by the European Parliament, which is not the entire deal, right? What the European Parliament is currently looking at is a proposal from the Commission on a very specific aspect of the deal, which is specific tariff reductions. And so to me, when we're talking about sunset clauses, I mean, what I hear is basically bringing more instability and lack of predictability for companies, because basically it raises questions around those tariff reductions, where do they fit? And if this specific proposal that's being reviewed by the Parliament and the member states includes that basically puts into question the stability of the deal itself. And so to me, I'm not quite sure how this is currently, this would be helping the business community in terms of the implementation of the deal. In the same way, the safeguards point, I mean, we already have a range of tools that are available by the EU. I mean, we've been talking at the onset about the EU countermeasures. I mean, there's a package of countermeasures on goods that are already on the table and have been approved. I mean, that already exists. You have the ACI that has been also alluded to by the Commission. So I'm not quite sure how this specifically is required in the context of this proposal, which is, again, one specific element of the entire deal that's being currently reviewed by the proposal and by the Parliament, and the member state, as they should.
Okay, thank you. Kathleen, I don't want to defend President von der Leyen, but this was trying to take a medical degree with a patient who's bleeding out on the floor. Nobody really knew how to deal with this. And, you know, we've had a few months to read through the medical books and try to work out how best to do this. Is the Parliament... does it take the view that this is a work in progress in terms of learning on the American side as well as the European side? Because, you know, last time we spoke, you were here in Washington at the US Capitol. The mood has changed a lot since then. You know, we see a lot of pushback from MAGA. There are being concessions made in different ways. Does the European Parliament have a different sense to how to negotiate today than it did at the beginning of this process?
Yeah, it is a very difficult question, Brian. I remember a conversation in Washington that was before the deal, and I think at that stage, we in the European Parliament, not all of us, you know, the diversity in the Parliament is big, but I think the trade-related, more progressive part of the Parliament, in a broad sense, was ready to take the fight in a reasonable way. We are not stupid. We were not going to go confrontational to take full confrontation with the Trump administration. But we always said, and I still believe that it's part of the solution. We always said, you do not let yourself be captured in this narrative of the Trump administration on the trade of goods. There's also the trade in services, where the situation is completely different, and take that into account into the negotiation. Put yourself negotiating issues on the table, and one of them was services. The second is the anti-coercion instrument. You don't have to use it to already start the engine on the anti-coercion. We should have done that. If we would have, it's an example, we could have done other things, but if we would have started these two things, put them on the table, then you can look at maybe a possibility to have a more balanced negotiations. We didn't. The Commission didn't do anything, but maybe some talks in the little small rooms of the European Commission with some, not all, with some of the leaders in Europe, mainly the big countries, mainly Germany and Italy, and not the more courageous countries, and so that led to what we are in today. And I still believe that people in the European Parliament, in the INTA committee, were more knowledgeable on how to deal with this than the European Commission. Well, maybe knowledgeable is not the right word, because I know the people in the Commission are not very knowledgeable, but they are really very much afraid to take up a fight over there. And the second, which I already said, is to make that broad coalition in the world. We're not used to do that, and that is so strange. So I think, and I still think that we do it softly now. We do soft amendments. It's really soft amendments. We could have said get rid of it. We do soft amendments, not that we think that this will rebalance the whole situation, but that it will make it more reasonable to accept this. And I just want to say to Thibault, if I would believe that this deal would give predictability and some sort of certainty to our economy and industry, I would even do this and accept the fact that this is imbalanced, illegal, and everything of that. But I don't believe that there is any predictability and security as certainty in this deal. And you saw that immediately after the deal. All of a sudden, some hundred of extra products were under the 332 steel and aluminium 50% tariffs, with all the complexity of that. And I do not believe, and next week it's something else. And you see everything is sliding and we don't know in what direction. And what we need to do in Europe is just to protect our own economy. And we're not doing that as it should.
Thank you. Verena, Catherine raised the issue of 232 investigations, which are largely a tool for leverage, and they can be applied and withdrawn pretty much at whim of the Department of Commerce or the president. And one of the narratives here in DC is that you got to give the boss a win. You got to make sure that whatever you're negotiating, President Trump has to feel good about it, has to feel as though he's accomplished something through that. So give the boss a win. How, in terms of steel and aluminium, and the dynamics you've described about the traceability, the complexity of the traceability of steel and aluminium in large machines, how do you give the boss a win out of this? How do you communicate to the White House, to the Department of Commerce, that there's a better way forward with this? Because, as Kathleen said, there is no predictability in this, in the sense that everything can change by lunchtime today, because the president needs a distraction, or the president just has been told something by another trade advisor, or some other leader has required something of him. All that is completely changeable on a 24-hour basis. So how can you give the president a win when it comes to steel and aluminium and industrial manufacturing?
It's pretty easy. Machines enable industry and production. And on a positive note, as Kathleen already said, there are many machines from Europe where you don't have a local manufacturer in US. So there is to a certain sense, there is a dependency, and we are working hand in hand with our customers for centuries. In our case, more than 60 years. And we are enabling growth and local production with these machines. And I think this is very important when we step into further negotiations, that we from VDMA think that we should work on the existing agreement and try to find a way forward to relieve these Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminiums, and also to stop this ongoing process where in a, I think, 4 months rhythm, other products are added to the list. And this is our biggest wish and also demand for the politician to work on.
So two things there. First of all, the local element, and secondly, the politician. So when Europe tends to look to Washington, it looks to DC. But the politicians that are most sensitive to this are not in DC, they're in the States. And for example, South Carolina, where there's a lot of car manufacturing, places like this, where you've got the agricultural belt in the Midwest. This is where people understand what's happening. You saw Marjorie Taylor Greene shockingly reversing her own position on this, because she saw what's happening in terms of agriculture and construction as well. So, do you think the European Union strategy is effective because it has a big voice in DC, or do you think it's not effective enough because it's not paying attention to the local manufacturers in the States and the voices of those politicians that can make their voices heard more effectively in DC? Verena.
I think I try to say it positively. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement. Of course, we as machine manufacturers see that, for example, the automotive industry and also the pharmaceutical industry are not related to sectoral tariffs. So we think there's much room for improvement to create a more fair deal. And as you said, the states are very well aware of the situation, and machines are investment goods. So this will take time because you are not changing your machinery equipment on a daily basis, more on years and centuries. And this is, I think, the key point, that only step by step the local consumers or the local facilities will realize how deep they are affected by these tariffs and by these sectoral tariffs.
Thank you. I just want to get a quick comment on this from each of you, and then we're going to take some questions as well. Georg, is the strategy right? Is the negotiating dynamic right? Is it too much focus in DC and not enough on the States?
I think sort of circumventing Trump is difficult, and for the time being, he's the one who's making the decisions. And when he decides that he wants something, usually that's what plays out in U.S. policy. One heard the story of when EU commissioners or representatives traveled over to Washington. They meet with their counterparts and they hear, well, President Trump has decided that he doesn't like the vote that's about to happen in the International Maritime Organization about capping or addressing emissions of ships. Got to do something about it. Take care of it, Europe. And essentially then what happens is the US administration pressures EU governments, and the vote in the IMO fails, even though we say believe in fighting climate change. The only ones who actually manage to stand up and vote against what is a US diktat is China. So yeah, one can try working on at the local level. Yes, in the long term, that's important. There are industries that also have the ear of President Trump. But I do feel that fundamentally the logic we need to understand here is that US has entered full force into a logic of coercion, of coercive bargaining at best, but essentially coercion. The use of force, we're no longer in a world that is about, and also in a transatlantic world that is about cooperation and something relatively rules-based. This is confrontational and the use of force. And this is becoming sort of tedious discussing it, but sort of this image of the schoolyard bully, I think that is the most important way of describing this kind of relations we are in. If we're not ready to stand up for it, stand up for ourselves and resist it, then the bullying will just continue, I'm afraid.
Is there anything really different about this dynamic? If you live in America, you wouldn't say that's coercion. You just say it's negotiation. That's how you get it done. And if you're from New York, probably you're more inclined to understand these dynamics of like straight talking and putting your demands on the table and just getting it done. Is Europe a bit too sensitive about this, or are we just not playing a clever enough game? And just back to the question of DC local dynamics, do you think the strategy is wrong? Thibaut, sorry.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think it's important to engage with everybody, and I think the more connections are being made with the states, I think that can only be positive in general. I mean, to answer your question around the metaphor, to me, I think what we're seeing is it's indeed more transactional. And so indeed, we understand to some extent demands from the US administration. I think the EU also, has different cards and also can look at this relationship in terms of what the EU wants out of it. I don't know that I would be so negative that no cooperation is at all possible between the EU and the US anymore. I think, frankly, if you're looking at challenges around non-market economies, for example, and China, I think it's a very clear area where there is a lot of alignment between what the US administration is trying to achieve and what we're hearing from the European Parliament or the Commission on those issues. The question, of course, is always the how you get there. But I think I wouldn't be so quick as saying nothing is possible, because frankly, I think if there is an interest and the interest is shared, we can make progress.
Same comment, DC state dynamics, or is European strategy not focused enough on this? Seems to be a lagged delay on the sound, actually. You hear me okay, Kathleen?
Question to me.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I didn't understand that. Can you repeat your question? It's about
Sure.
Washington and states.
The dynamic of the DC state dynamic. That Europe is too focused in DC, not focused enough on the states. Though, to be fair, there's some lobbying effort has been changed the last couple of months, and the strategy, as Georg describes it as well, is Europe too sensitive to the bully boy tactics, the coercion? Isn't this just the way America has always done business? It just was more polite about it before?
I have to say, when I was in Washington, it was before the summer break, and so it was the first months of the Trump administration. I have to say, everybody whom I spoke with who was not of the Trump administration or the surroundings of that, and I didn't talk to anybody of them because they don't want to see us, they don't want to meet with us, they don't want to spend a minute of time with us. So, but I have to say, most of these people were in shock themselves, even more than we were, about what was happening. So I do think that the gravity with which this is happening, and the amount of the combination of even if you are an arrogant bastard like the United States maybe have been for decades, they still more or less respected international rules. And I'm not saying by the book, by the letter, but by the spirit. You cannot just coerce. You can try to do that with African countries, and so do we, by the way. Don't have to deny on that. But the way this is going was a shock for almost everybody who has some sort of reason in themselves, even if you're an American. But having said that, and I repeated that, and I think that is relevant for the future. I've repeated that when I was in Washington. I met with many people that are related to the Democratic Party, but also think tanks, and I said, look, from the first Trump administration to the second Trump administration, in between there was a Democratic administration, of course. They didn't change the policies that Trump put in place. They made it a little bit more soft, but they didn't solve the problem within the WTO. They even didn't cut on the tariffs. They just sort of eased them down or suspended them, and so I told the Democrats that their way of doing trade with the rest of the world has changed in the course of the last decades itself, and they are not so in style they are, but in content not so far away from that. So I challenge them to change their policy and narrative and maybe do it together with us. If you want to look to the future, how will the future of trade look like? How will the economic security in the world look like? How will the geopolitics look like? You have to connect these dots, and I would love to do that with the Democrats. And in there, I think we should not just look at Washington. In there, I think it's important for us to look at democratic governors or mayors, like in New York, and start talking with them, because we need to prepare the future, and the future is it will be without Trump. Well, you never know, third term, but let's say it will be without Trump, but it can be without somebody even worse than Trump. It's possible. So we need to prepare that future.
If you want stability, of course, a third term would be exactly what you'd be asking for, of course, wouldn't it? Let's do some questions.
Assess.
So I think Matthias is still trying to connect there. And there's no question for, let me see, anyone in the panel. Does any deal on steel quotas and carbon credits have to stay between the EU and the UK and not include the US? Do you know when the concept of aligned credit markets was first raised? I think it's somebody from Strategia. Anybody on that?
Does it work, Ilonka?
Verena?
No. Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
We
Hello?
can hear you. Matthias, we can't see you. Put your camera on.
Okay. Just 1 second, please.
Let's see. Okay, let's take another question. Francesco De Angelis from Flint asks, anyone from the panel, what do you think should be the upcoming economic security doctrine? What do you think it should include, the economic security doctrine? Kathleen, any comments on that?
The thing is, in the near past, we've made a couple of the European Commission came up with good ideas on, think about the Critical Raw Materials Act as an example. It's not now that we know that we're over dependent on the rest of the world when it comes to critical raw materials, oil and gas, defense. You know the story. Yeah? And on critical raw materials, the Commission already came up with an act, and that's good. But it's typical Europe, I have to say, and it's not just a problem of the Commission; it's the way Europe functions. So we have to reflect on that as well, to come up with a lot of papers and acts and whatever. But it's not policy. And what we've seen since then is that our dependency on critical raw materials in China, the last couple of years, didn't decrease. It increased even. So it became worse instead of better. And I do know you cannot change these things over a year's time, but it is really devastating to see that it's getting worse. So an economic security narrative should be more than just paper and goals with figures on it. It really needs severe policies that goes on protecting our industry, looking at the critical infrastructure, thinking about circularity is also a very good example. We all know that we need circularity to solve the problem of our over dependencies, but we're hardly putting real policies in place. So no, what we're doing is killing the Green Deal, while we need the Green Deal to deal with over-dependencies when it comes to gas and oil and critical raw materials and so on. So we're doing the quite opposite of what should be the policy.
The Green Deal, you remember that?
I do.
Georg, just you want to answer that question as well, and then we're going to come to Matthias and see if we can. He's smiling, so you can clearly hear us. Georg, go ahead.
Well, I don't want to steal any thunder from Matthias, but I think this economic security package or doctrine is taking on a lot of importance now, and I think what one needs is to sort of clarify the meaning, and I guess that's the sense of what Kathleen was saying, what one means by economic security, and this obviously is not only defensive, it's not only about resilience and supply chains, but it's also about growth, tech leadership, diversification, looking at the link with hard security through economic tools. But I think the real message of this package, and the test will be of this doctrine, the test will be its implementation, is about the capacity to use our tools and the message of proactive use of tools. Exactly everything we failed with in the past, both sort of running faster tools and defensive tools and negotiation tools, everything we failed with in facing the US and facing also China. And we have a lot of tools in our toolbox. I think we need new ones. I mean, tools such as the ACI, the anti-coercion instrument, have been mentioned. We probably need new ones such as information sharing with industry. One sees this story around chips, Nexperia. I got the impression that nobody has prepared for this and knows about how to react to it. So this is a part of the doctrine, how to use tools, how to better integrate tools. There are tools within the comp portfolio that we are using from a level playing field point of view that needs to be used for an economic security point of view. I think there's a whole story about governance, preparedness, capacity to know and capacity to decide. We spoke about EU27 unity, working on that, not sort of ad hoc, but institutionally. So there's plenty of things to come out of this doctrine that needs to be put in order now. And so I hope this can be sort of turn the page from an approach to trade, economic security, to Europe's geo-industrial deal that really hasn't been at the level it should be. So let's stay positive and hope that this can come.
Kieran Foster also sent a similar question. Thank you for that, Kieran. Moment of truth, Matthias, can you hear us? Can we hear you?
I can certainly hear you, and I've been following some of it with interest. So I don't want to start redoing the whole thing. But so what is the question that I can help you explain or answer to here?
So a question that we've been discussing is the strategy fit for purpose, which I think you're going to say yes. So I'm not going to give you that question. It's where do we go from here? The state of play, there's been a learning curve. You kind of know how to deal with the Trump administration this time around. The political dynamics are changing here. We see some rollback on tariffs already, and particularly with food. How can Europe's industrial manufacturing sector find a way through what has become an increasingly complex layer of bureaucracy, particularly with supply chain? How does the Commission view a way through this? And are you optimistic that what the deal is going to soften or be more workable in the medium term?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's some good questions that you are asking there, Brian. And I think you're reminding us, that we have to be in the real world. And in the real world, the EU-US trade and investment relationship is incredibly important. It's millions of jobs. It's trillions of trade and investment. The real world is also that there was a serious amount of instability and risk of a negative spiral of retaliation across the Atlantic in the beginning of the year, and that there was a demand from all member states, from the European Parliament, and also from all the stakeholders to try and fix this. And this is why the Commission acted, engaged with the US, and struck a deal with the US. Where are we now? And where do we go? What we have now is we have inserted we have a certain amount, a good amount of certainty and stability. Not everything we want, but we are definitely in a better place than at the beginning of the year. What we have to do now are, I think, essentially three things in relation to the Americans. We need to do what we committed to. We need to hold. And that means also bringing the legislation through the co-legislators process. And with the changes, and I think we fully respect that the co-legislators, as part of their prerogative, might impose on the deal in terms of suspension, or in terms of safeguards, or other issues. That is the role of the co-legislators in the working democracy that is the EU. So that's the first thing. We've got to do what we need to do as well, good speed, but also in full respect of the co-legislators process. The second thing is we need to hold the US to what they have promised. And they have done a lot of what they promised. They have lower tariffs on cars. They have lower tariffs on lots of other issues to 15%. They have exempted a number of goods of our interest from tariffs, but they can still do better when it comes to steel and aluminium derivatives. The situation is not as satisfactory there, and I think they can still do better in terms of ensuring that there are not new Section 232 tariffs or new and other measures, impacting trade. What we want is certainty and stability, and we need to avoid any actions from their side or our side that would hollow that out. And the third thing we need to do in terms of the US is to then in good faith and seriously follow up on the rest of the joint statement. And there's a lot of things that we can do there in the area of standards, in the area of economic security, when it comes to working together on SPS issues. There's lots of things that we can do to facilitate trade and investment across the Atlantic to the benefit of the many, many, many millions of people which are engaged in that and who are asking us to do exactly that job in the real world. Now, much broader than that, I think that touches upon what do we do to become more competitive ourselves. Well, we've got to put our own house in order. We need to double down on the internal markets, capital union. All these things that we can do, because trade policy is good, but it's not a cure-all, and it is not going to save us from our own lack of integration or the own lack of creating a bigger and stronger and more integrated market. And the other thing we have to do is to go forward on the simplification that we have all committed to politically, so that it makes it easier to do business, and also, of course, in a manner that is sustainable. There has to be continuity from the different strong and important political acts that we have done, whether it's the Green Deal, whether it's now the omnibuses, or whether it's the new competitive measures that we're taking.
Just to come to the elements of that you talked about there, when you're negotiating with Trump administration, we said earlier, maybe you heard that you got to give the boss a win, and anything which smacks of opposition is going to be rolled over fairly sharply as well. And not to second guess you, but it does sound like while you will respect the co-legislators, you're not optimistic that the administration would accept a lot of what the Parliament's going to be asking for. So how does Europe repackage its requests in a way that has a win, has a feel-good element for the Trump administration, where everybody wins, or at least the Americans can see what the actual benefit is for them in this? What has the Commission learned during these months?
Well, I think there are a lot of lessons always, but let's just take one field. Look at what the U.S. has done through increasing the tariffs in the manner that they have done. They have made their imports much more expensive in a number of areas, and we have just seen that the U.S. administration has lowered tariffs unilaterally on a whole number of goods that they need to import. Now, the amount of goods that the U.S. need to import that they cannot produce themselves, or that they cannot produce competitively themselves, there are a lot of it. It's in machinery, it's in chemicals. It's in this area that we also want to have a conversation with the U.S. to see, what is it that we can export, and that the U.S. might want to have the EU as a trusted source, and where is it that it will benefit the U.S. economy? I think we can do a lot there, because what the U.S. is doing now, of course, will have a big impact. We're going from a situation where, if things stay as they are, U.S. importers will pay, instead of paying 6 billion euros on what they import from the EU, they will be paying around 60 to 80 billion euros, or US dollars. And those extra costs will fall on American consumers.
It's true that they would fall on American consumers, but with some of the industrial manufacturers, for example, a European company may be selling to its subsidiary in the United States as well. So actually, while it's nominally a US company that will have to pay those tariffs, actually it's the European company that's losing twice along that road as well. And just a question for you, it says it's from Ryan Hunter from J&J. You may or may not know the answer to this. Has the Commission received any confirmation from the US on the 15% tariff ceiling also applying to other 232 investigations, such as medical devices? And what about the process for future exemptions? Can you comment on that?
It's our clear understanding that there's a broad 15% ceiling, and that's something we are repeating towards the US, both at the political and technical level. And it's something that we want them to respect. The litmus test is going to be a little bit what comes out of the many Section 232 investigations that the US have have going on for the moment. Now, the good news is that, for example, when they did it on lumber, well, they clearly respected this. So I think we're hopeful, and we're in constant dialogue with the US on that. Sorry, the other part, we're looking forward to discussing the exemptions, which will be both a benefit to the EU and the US. We have to get into the weeds of that. I mean, it is just a couple of months ago that we actually did the joint statement. We've been very focused on our own internal implementation steps, and we're looking now how to frame the further discussion with the US and how to develop all the other pointers that you have in the joint statement. And one of them is, of course, the question of what further exemptions from these tariffs will the US be willing to do. But we will be getting into the weeds of that. And I think that Mr. Lotnick and Mr. Greer will be here next week. I think we're looking forward to that opportunity to move forward and have some good and open conversations at political level.
From what I hear, the dynamic dealing with each of those gentlemen is slightly different, and that Mr. Lutnick, being a finance guy, wasn't so big on trade, but has learned a lot in the last few months. And Mr. Greer is really in the driving seat for policy detail. Best of luck with that next week. Verena, when it comes to Mercosur, the larger picture here as well, do your members have a sense that there needs to be a pivot away from the United States, that this is the next 4 years, 10 years, if you get a second Republican administration right after, whether that's J.D. Vance, Rubio, or somebody else, that you really got to be looking much wider, and you got to be looking strategic autonomy within Europe as well, and that just America is going to be such a tough market for you can't find a way through in the next few years. How do your members feel about that? Then Thibaut, please.
Yeah, I'm happy that you touched this point because it was missing so far. At the moment, the US market is the biggest export market outside the European Union for machinery export. So it is and it will be very important. Nevertheless, we really call the European Union to bring all the free trade agreement they are working on into action. This is Mercosur, this is Indonesia, this is India, this is Mexico, for example. Because at the end, free trade will definitely outperform market isolation, and diversification is key in this very challenging times.
Then Kathleen.
First of all, let me say that what?
No, go ahead.
That the whole diversification strategy is a good strategy that I think will have a lot of support in the European Parliament. I happened to be in Indonesia, I think 2 days after so-called Independence Day. I don't know whether people remember that the day with the pancartas and all the figures. And I think Indonesia was like 50% plus tariffs, and they were completely in shock. But at the same time, because we all remember the Prabowo government, the president campaigned amongst other things on an anti-EU campaign. It was on deforestation. It was these Europeans, they think they can come and spell what we have to do. It was quite anti-European, but it overnight that changed, and a few months later we have an agreement with Indonesia, although there was an agreement that was already 8 years on the negotiation. So there's also good things happening, in the sense that where Europe has been seen as the one with the very complicated laws and the one very difficult, not flexible, they come to negotiate on a free trade agreement with all their requests on labor and Green Deal. Voila, that changed into you're still very difficult, but at least you're reliable. Once you make a deal, you have a deal with Europe, and they stick to it. And I think we need to. That's a precious something, because yes, of course, we are about setting standards. Let's not lose that. And with the downsizing or the attacks on the Green Deal, we're doing exactly the opposite of what we should be doing, both when it comes to economic security as when it comes to being a reliable partner for the future. Now China it's not a reliable partner, but China is leading in a lot of issues when it comes to new technologies, photovoltaics, renewables, and we're losing again. So instead of sticking to our strategy, which is a good strategy, the Green Deal, we're lowering our standards. And sorry, it's also the Commission that is part of that bad game. And so there will be a lot of support for instance, the Indonesia deal. Mercosur will be more difficult, but let's try to see how far we can run. But I have a suggestion also for the European Commission. If you want to talk about simplification and making things more easy, you will find a lot of support, broad support in the European Parliament, for instance, coming up faster with your trade agreements, not taking like half a year or a year before you come to the parliament with your texts. The same for safeguards. The industry is asking for safeguards. We take at least double the time to do the investigation only. So if you want to toughen up, we need to be more flexible, especially when it comes to coming up with the trade agreements to the parliament, but also toughen up when it comes to investigation on safeguards.
Thank you, Kathleen. We're pretty close in time, so just to get a quick reaction from Thibaut, and then Matthias can respond to Kathleen's suggestions. Thibaut, this is relationship advice to the European Commission, so steady and dependable. Is this the way we want to go forward?
Look, I think, the EU has built its success around openness, and I think what we've been seeing in terms of the free trade agreements, is really something we support. As industry, you need to be looking at the EU single market for a lot of our companies as a key component of their global supply chains, and so all of those developments are something we're fully behind. I do agree with Matthias's point, though, that we're only able to do that if the EU's economy is strong, and to strengthen the EU's economy, that's the competitiveness agenda. That's basically the ongoing efforts to simplify regulation, not to lower standards, but to see to what extent we can reach the same level of ambition with simply ways that are easier for companies to comply with. And I think that's at the heart of the conversation right now at the EU level. I think, building more resilience doesn't mean turning away from the US, because I don't think you're turning away from an 8.7 trillion economic relationship, but instead it's how do you strengthen that relationship, and that's the implementation of the deal. And then at the same time, how do you look to your partnerships around the world and continue on basically what the EU has been doing so far, which is incredible leadership on the free trade front?
Thank you. Matthias?
Yeah, very, very short comments. The US is a key trading partner. It's 17% of our trade, but it's not the only game in town. So, I completely agree with Kathleen's idea that we need to do better in terms of diversification. We need to do it faster, and we need to do it in a manner that keeps the broad political support to the EU's balanced trade agenda, which is something that is very, very important for us to move forward on the trade agenda. And it's uncertain times. The transatlantic relationship does not have the stability that it had it had before. I don't think the status quo ante is something that we will be able to return to. So we'll be working hard, both when it comes to new trade deals, doubling down on the internal market, and also the simplification, and working very closely with the co-legislators, and working very closely with stakeholders too.
Thank you. Quick comment, Georg, and then we're going to go to our wrap-up sound bites. Georg.
Well, thank you so much. I guess this can in a sense be my final comment and wrap up. I think I'm intrigued by this discourse around the real world. I think we all live in the real world, whether you're in the Commission or whether in your sort of the machinery production factory floor. I think you're in the real world, and I think that's not real the debate one should be having here. I think the key debate here is whether this arrangement with the US is a stable one, or not. And I think this is not a stable one. And I think what one's seeing on 232s, what I'm seeing around the environmental rules or might be coming around digital rules, means that we as Europeans need to prepare for this to not hold and to fail, and for what tomorrow is about, also then in discussions with the Americans. And that's where also I see, of course, AmCham's interest in this and big tech's interest and those kind of things, but we have to think also as Europeans and prepare for that reality. In terms of the real world, I think what we should be also more upfront talking about is the kind of choke points, dependencies, pressures, coercion we're facing from other sides. I think European companies, many European companies across different sectors, have been just days or weeks away from stopping production or breaking their neck because of essentially access to vital chips or critical minerals or so forth being held back. That's also what we need to prepare better for in a united manner, and that's why we need the economic security doctrine and this capacity to use our tools and use them together. Of course, it's going to be a long haul fight, not months, not years, but not months, but years, in terms of getting more ready to provide for ourselves. But this is clearly the reality we are now when it comes to being ready to use our tools. What I do take encouragement from in this conversation is the fact that tariffs are definitely sticky. And I think I heard from Matthias that the Commission and others will listen to the co-legislators about the possibility of a sunset clause. Maybe it should not be 18 months as the European Parliament has proposed, but maybe it should be 36 months, taking us to the end of the Trump presidency. But one should not try to write these kind of unbalanced, unfair, unsustainable agreements into some kind of stones that will stick with us.
I got to stop you there. We've got to give the others a chance to just wrap up as well. But thank you for that, Gary. It was great. Thibaut, 30 seconds, your takeaway soundbite for today.
Well, look, I think, as companies, we wish we were in a different situation, but we're now looking at the cards that are on the table. A trade war would be much worse than the deal that is currently on the table, which is something the EU has been able to manage. I think we've underestimated in this conversation the harm that would have caused, the spiraling of tit for tat between the EU and the US for European consumers, for American consumers, for businesses on both sides. I think we can't take that too lightly. And so now what we can do is support the deal indeed, make sure it's implemented, that includes the proposal that's currently in the Parliament, which ideally sticks to the scope as much as possible. And then we can move to a more positive agenda and build on the other points in the joint statement that can benefit both sides.
Thank you. Verena, 30 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. So the VDMA urges both the European Commission as well as the German government to seek a pathway to relieve the European exporters from Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminium, and to ensure that machinery and equipment are excluded from any further future sectoral tariffs. And at the end also, the big call out to strengthen the competitiveness of the EU and the diversification.
Thank you, Verena. Kathleen, 30 seconds.
Well, first of all, to Georg, the reason why we said 18 months is, of course, we think, we hope, we believe, I don't know what to choose, that in the midterm, the power of Trump is broken. But as a final statement, let me just zoom out. I'm quite convinced that the breakdown of the international trading order that goes hand in hand with the geopolitical order is unfortunately part of a bigger narrative of the extreme right in the United States, but also in Europe, and that goes hand in hand with the degradation of our democracies. And the question is, will we be able to keep up with our European model? And that's not just economic, it's democracy.
Kathleen, thank you so much. Final word, Matthias?
Of you. Very short. The EU relation with the US is very important. So many people are depending on it. We need to do our best to develop and nurture it and make it secure. For that, we will be doing the three things I said. We will definitely implement what we've done. We'll keep the US to their word, and we'll be looking forward to further develop all the things that's in the joint statement.
Thank you so much. Matthias, if I can make one suggestion, is that we develop a ballroom export strategy. It's really the growth market that we have here in DC. So I look forward to hearing that from you personally. Thank you to all of our panelists today. This is quite a heavy, detailed discussion. I really appreciate the contributions from each of you, and Matthias also for your persistence in getting back online. I'm so sorry that took so long. And Kathleen and Georg, Thibaut and Verena also, thank you for your contributions. To VDMA for supporting the program today, and for our team in Brussels in the studio with Zora and Pablo, Anna, and the others there as well. We thank you. And for your questions and for your engagement online today, we really appreciate it. So from Washington, we're just getting started here. We don't know what fresh chaos will implode during the course of the day. And for you in Brussels, I wish you a good afternoon.